How could a season, just a shift in weather, halt what was then the most feared army on Earth? What if, on that November day in 1941, Joseph Stalin had fled the capital as his advisors urged him to? Would the Soviet Union have survived the winter? Or collapsed under the weight of German steel? We often remember Stalingrad as the moment when Hitler's war machine began to unravel, but history whispers a different story. Before Stalingrad, before the ruins of Kursk, there was Moscow, not yet a battlefield, but already the beating heart of resistance. And in that winter of 1941, Moscow was not only a city under siege, it was a symbol, a gamble, a last stand. Thousands of civilians, factory workers and students, untrained, unfed, unarmed, took up shovels, not rifles, to dig defenses in frozen earth. They slept in the snow, wrapped in rags, their feet bare. But they did not leave their posts. Why did they stay? What did they believe in so deeply that they would face death, frostbite, and starvation? Not for Stalin, perhaps, but for something even older. This is not just the story of a battle. It is the story of an idea tested by ice and fire, of a capital that refused to fall even as everything else crumbled around it. And yet, this story is rarely told, because before history remembers its heroes, it often forgets where the real turning point began. Let us return now, to the edge of a frozen city, to the week the world held its breath, to the moment when winter, yes, winter, became the most powerful army in the world. To understand the Battle of Moscow, you must step back, not just months, but decades. Before the tanks rolled and the snow fell, this war had already begun. In words, in ideas, in fears. Europe on the edge. The year is 1941. Europe has been at war for 2 years, but the seeds of this conflict were sown long before. After the devastation of World War I, Germany simmered in humiliation and economic ruin. Out of this turmoil rose Adolf Hitler, a man who promised not just revenge, but a new world order shaped by blood, race, and empire. In the East, the Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin was forging its own transformation, one of forced industrialization, political purges, and ideological control. The two systems, Nazism and communism, stood not just as rival states, but as opposing visions of civilization. By mid-1941, Hitler had conquered most of Western Europe. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. The British were holding out, but barely. And then Hitler turned his eyes eastward, not out of necessity, but out of obsession. Lebensraum, living space. The ideological bedrock of Hitler's plans, a belief that the German people needed to expand into the East, into the vast, resource-rich lands of the Soviet Union, and that the Slavic peoples, Jews and communists who lived there, were inferior, expendable, destined to be ruled or removed. Operation Barbarossa, the code name for the invasion, was not a military campaign. It was an ideological crusade. Stalin's miscalculation. Ironically, Stalin had signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler just 2 years earlier. For months, he ignored warnings from his generals, his spies, even from the British and Americans. He refused to believe that Germany would risk war on 2 fronts. He was wrong. When the attack came on June 22, 1941, it was swift, brutal, and almost biblical in scale. More than 3 million German soldiers, supported by tanks, aircraft, and Allied armies, poured across a 2,900-kilometer front. Entire Soviet divisions vanished overnight. Cities burned, and the road to Moscow lay open. But this wasn't just the sound of a dying world. In Moscow, Radios still played Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich, but the concerts were growing quieter. The streets were filled with a mix of dread and defiance. Men lined up to enlist. Women gathered to dig trenches. Children whispered questions their parents couldn't answer. In small apartments, lit by candles and rationed electricity, families huddled together, unsure if their city, if their world, would survive the season.
What is this?
The architecture was a blend of old imperial grandeur and stark Soviet utilitarianism. Golden domes of Orthodox churches stood beside concrete government blocks. Icons of saints hidden behind portraits of Lenin. A city of contradictions waiting for a reckoning.
Yes, every detail matters.
The people of Moscow had seen revolutions, famines and purges, but nothing like what was coming. This is the moment, before the first snow, before the first air raid, when history held its breath. The armies were still moving, but in the soul of the nation, something was shifting. A storm was coming, not just from the skies, but from the past. It began with speed. The German army, experienced, organized, and arrogant, had never lost. In a matter of weeks, they had shattered Soviet defenses and swept through vast stretches of land. By October 1941, the road to Moscow seemed open. The final phase of the campaign had a name: Operation Typhoon. 3 massive army groups with over 1.8 million men, nearly 2,000 tanks, and 14,000 guns surged toward the Soviet capital. Soviet troops retreating, burning fields behind them, left smoldering villages in their wake. The land itself seemed to be sacrificed to slow the invaders. The Battle of Moscow had begun, not with a single explosion, but with the earth trembling under the weight of 1,000 iron beasts. October, Blitzkrieg meets resistance. At first, it seemed like the Blitzkrieg would work again. The German panzer groups advanced in sweeping arcs, encircling Soviet divisions near Vyazma and Bryansk. In just 10 days, over 600,000 Soviet troops were captured. But something was different. The Red Army, though battered, did not collapse. Fresh units emerged, undertrained, under-equipped, but fiercely determined. Moscow's factories had not stopped. The Soviets moved entire production plants east of the Ural Mountains, by rail, by truck, by hand. Even as the city prepared for siege, it was still making bullets, boots, and hope. From the eyes of a soldier. We were told the city would fall in 2 weeks, recalls Heinrich Bauer, a German infantryman. But each mile felt longer. The roads weren't roads, they were mud. Tanks got stuck, trucks overturned, and always the partisans. You could feel them watching. The Soviet countryside had turned against them. Railways were sabotaged, convoys ambushed, bridges destroyed before they could be crossed. At night it was quiet, too quiet. Then a flare, a scream, and another truck gone. November, the turning winds. By early November, the Germans reached the outskirts of Moscow. They could see the spires, the faint glow of city lights. Victory seemed close, but so did winter. And then the skies changed. Rain turned to sleet, sleet to snow. Roads disappeared, steel froze, rifles jammed. Marching boots crunching snow, muffled explosions in the distance. I remember waking up, my boots frozen to the ground, said Nina Belova, a 19-year-old Soviet nurse. We had no more morphine, but the soldiers kept coming. Some had coats, some didn't. Their lips were blue, but they smiled when I told them. Stalin is still in Moscow. Yes, Stalin stayed, Against all advice, the Soviet leader remained in the capital. His presence became a symbol, a line in the snow. If Stalin would not run, neither would Moscow. The city mobilizes. Civilians worked day and night, digging trenches, laying barbed wire, pouring anti-tank ditches across frozen fields. Children carried sandbags. Elderly men hauled logs. Artists painted camouflage over buildings. We built barricades with whatever we had: wood, bricks, furniture, one schoolteacher remembered. At night, we read Pushkin by candlelight. In the morning, we dug. The city was transforming, not into a shelter, but into a fortress. And then, in the second week of November, the first German shells fell on Moscow. The earth shook, glass shattered, but the line held. Not one German soldier would set foot inside the capital.
Die Geschichte auf oder fängt von neuem an.
Здесь история останавливается или начинается заново.
When the fire burns out, what remains? The Battle of Moscow was not just fought with tanks and rifles. It was fought in kitchens without food, in classrooms turned into barracks, in letters that never arrived. And as the snow deepened, so did the scars, visible and invisible. Villages that vanished.
Hold still, comrade. Just a little longer.
As German forces advanced, hundreds of villages in the Moscow region were caught in the fire. Some were destroyed by retreating Soviets implementing the scorched earth policy. Others were flattened by German artillery, or worse. Entire families burned in their homes. Churches collapsed onto their congregations. Winter arrived, but warmth had disappeared. A diary entry found in the ruins of a farmhouse near Mojhaisk read, "They took my husband yesterday. I do not know where. The barn is gone. The cow is gone. The sky is gray. We pray, not for victory, but for mourning." Tatiana M., October 1941. The people's response. The Soviet government declared total mobilization, but this was not just policy. It was a psychological transformation. Others sent sons to the front with tears and quiet pride. Sparely older than children joined militia units. Some had never fired a weapon. Geographical woodry workers labored through air raids, building tanks under candlelight. One Pravda article in November 1941 captured the mood. We do not fight only with bullets. We fight with boots, with bread, with belief. The soul of Russia is not made of iron, but it does not break. Would come, but not without loss. Means of thousands of civilians died, many unnamed, unrecorded. Over 500,000 soldiers from both sides were killed, wounded, or frozen. Hermione, entire school classes were erased, their desks left empty. Trade stations became morgues. Hospitals overflowed with the maimed, the blind, the broken.
God has not given us a spirit
We stopped
of fear,
counting fingers.
but
We
of
began
power
counting
and
arms,
of love
legs,
and of
then
sound mind.
just breathing. Soviet nurse, Red Cross report, December 1941. And yet, something awoke in the hearts of the survivors. The fear remained. Across the divide, perspectives from within. Urban Moscow, fear coexisted with defiance. Loudspeakers played Tchaikovsky between air raid sirens. Citizens walked past barricades like they were fences in a garden. Girls braided their hair and sang folk songs as they shoveled snow into anti-tank ditches. In for the countryside, people spoke in hushed tones. Food was traded like gold. Stories of German atrocities, some true, some imagined, spread like wildfire. Grandmothers recited Orthodox prayers under their breath, even though religion had long been outlawed. Urbangers wrote home less and less. Many no longer expected to return. Those who did came back changed. My son left with a guitar. He came back with silence. Mother from Kaluga, early 1942. the world watches. In London, Churchill praised the Soviet stand as the glimmer of hope in Europe's darkest hour. American newspapers, once skeptical of the Soviets, began shifting tone. If Moscow holds, the world may turn. New York Times, November 1941. Refugees arrived in Leningrad, in Tashkent, in far Siberia, carrying little but stories. Even in exile, they clung to something more than survival, a sense of shared endurance. This was not just a battle. It was a rite of passage for a nation, a breaking, followed by a quiet, stubborn reassembly. The battle ended, but Moscow never forgot. Long after the gunfire faded and the tanks were buried by time, something remained. Not just victory, but a memory carved into the bones of a nation. And like snow that melts, only to fall again, it returns, quietly, generation after generation. Lessons in strategy and humility. For the world's military planners, the Battle of Moscow is taught in war colleges across continents.
Today, we're going to talk
F
about
revealed that
1941
logistics
to
can defeat
1942,
ambition.
the battle for Moscow.
That overconfidence, no matter how powerful the army, is fatal. That weather, terrain, and people are not footnotes in strategy, but the main characters. But beyond the textbooks lies a deeper truth. It wasn't just Soviet artillery that stopped the Germans. It was Soviet will. The trenches dug by teenagers, the railway lines sabotaged by partisans, the furnace workers who made bullets in unheated rooms with frost on their faces. No general could plan that. No ideology could predict it. It was the soul of a people, laid bare, what endures, stone, song, and story.
We should.
Today, statues of anonymous soldiers line the highways west of Moscow. Some are grand, cast in bronze. Others are simple mounds with wooden crosses. But each marks a place where someone stood and did not run. In schools, children still read poems written by 1941 survivors.
My dearest John,
In villages, the
I
elderly
received your
still
letter
whisper
today, and my
tales
heart
of the
aches with every
winter
word.
that saved the world. In Moscow, Red Square still stands firm, not just as a landmark, but as a survivor. And in Russian folklore, the Battle of Moscow became more than history. It became myth. Myth of endurance, of silence before strength, of how ordinary people, armed with nothing but cold hands and warm hearts, held back a storm of steel. What can we learn today? We live in a world where battles are different. They are fought with information, with economies, with technology. But the lesson of Moscow is timeless. The strength of a city lies not in its walls, but in its people. It reminds us familiarity in the face of crisis is power. That belief in something greater than oneself can...
but was that the whole story?
What if the snow had fallen 2 weeks later? What if Hitler had not diverted his armies to Ukraine? What if Stalin had fled, just one train ride away from abandoning his capital? History is a house built on what-ifs. And the Battle of Moscow sits at the very threshold of those questions. For all we know, victory may have hung by the breath of a single blizzard, or by a nameless engineer who kept a train line running, or a girl in a bread line who passed a note to a soldier just before dawn. We like to think history is shaped by great men, but in Moscow, it was held together by countless invisible acts and the cold. Is that really the whole story? Or is there more, hidden beneath the frost, buried in unmarked graves, whispered in memoirs long out of print? What Moscow left behind. Moscow was not the final word. It was a beginning. The first time Hitler's army was stopped. The first time the myth of German invincibility cracked, but it was not the worst. Not yet. Because just beyond the horizon, on the banks of another frozen river, in a city called Stalingrad, a fire was waiting to erupt. Where Moscow stood firm, Stalingrad would burn. Where Moscow froze the enemy, Stalingrad would drown them in blood. The battle continues. So the question is not, did Moscow survive? The question is, did we learn anything from it? About fear, about resistance, about what we do
What would you have
when
done
the
if you
storm
stood at that line?
comes. The past does not speak in shouts, it speaks in echoes, and if you listen carefully, you can still hear Moscow breathing.